Most people don't fail because they're not good enough, they fail because they stop one step too early. Ethan Carter didn't know that, at least not at first. He only knew one thing: he had failed again. At 26 years old, he sat in a small apartment just a few hundred square feet wide, staring at another rejection email glowing on his laptop screen. The words were always different, but the meaning was the same: not selected, not qualified, not this time. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as if the air itself was heavy. This wasn't his first failure, it wasn't even his 10th, it was his 27th, and each one had left a mark, not on his body, but somewhere deeper, somewhere harder to explain. The first few times it didn't feel so bad. After his 5th attempt, he told himself, this is normal, everyone struggles in the beginning. After his 10th, he started watching others more closely, friends landing jobs, building businesses, posting wins online, while he stayed stuck, refreshing his inbox, hoping for something, anything. By the 15th failure, doubt began to creep in quietly, like a whisper: maybe they're just better than you, maybe you're not built for this. By the 20th attempt, that whisper had turned into a voice that followed him everywhere. When he woke up, when he worked, when he tried again, it said the same thing over and over: you're wasting your time. Still, he didn't stop, not yet. There was something inside him that kept pushing him forward, even when he was tired, even when nothing seemed to work. So he kept applying, kept building, kept trying different ideas. Late nights turned into early mornings, coffee cups piled up on his desk, and notebooks filled with plans that never quite worked out. But with every failure, something small changed. He didn't notice it at first, but it was there: a tiny adjustment, a new understanding, a different way of thinking. Then came the 27th failure, and this one felt different. This one felt final. Ethan didn't feel angry, he didn't feel frustrated, he just felt empty, like something inside him had quietly shut down. He closed his laptop and stared at the wall in silence for a long moment. No thoughts, no plans, just stillness. Maybe this is it, he thought. Maybe this is where I stop. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about trying again, he wasn't thinking about fixing anything, he was thinking about walking away. And as that thought settled in, something strange happened. Not a loud realization, not a sudden burst of motivation, just a quiet question that rose slowly in his mind: what if I didn't actually fail 27 times? What if I just stopped 27 times? The question did not leave Ethan's mind, it stayed there quietly, repeating itself over and over again, as if it was waiting for an answer he had never considered before. He sat up slowly in his chair and looked back at the laptop screen, still glowing in the dim light of his room. 27 failures, he whispered to himself, but for the first time the number did not feel like a weight, it felt like a pattern he had never fully understood before. He opened one of his old folders and began scrolling through documents, resumes, ideas, notes, each one representing an attempt, each one frozen at the moment he had decided to stop. And as he looked closer, something unexpected started to appear. The early attempts were rough, unpolished, almost careless, but as the number increased, something changed. His writing became clearer, his ideas became sharper, his strategies more detailed. It was subtle but undeniable. He was not the same person who had started this journey. He had improved with every attempt, but he had never stayed long enough to see the result. He leaned forward now, fully focused. What if the problem was not failure? What if the problem was stopping too soon? He opened attempt number 27 again, and read through it carefully, this time not with frustration but with curiosity. Within minutes he saw things he had missed before: small gaps, unclear statements, weak positioning, things that could be fixed, not things that proved he was incapable. His heart began to beat a little faster, not from pressure, but from possibility. For the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel stuck, he felt like he was standing right at the edge of something important, but still uncertain. He stood up and walked to the small window in his apartment. The city lights outside flickered softly, cars passing by, people moving forward, everyone going somewhere, and for a moment he wondered how many of them had been in this exact place, how many had reached this point and turned back without realizing how close they actually were. He took a deep breath and returned to his desk slowly. He did not rush, he did not try to start something new. Instead, he did something different. He went back to every single attempt one by one. He studied them not as failures but as steps. He wrote down what worked, what did not, what could be improved. The process was quiet, almost simple, but it felt different. It felt intentional. Hours passed without him noticing the clock moving on the wall. The frustration that once filled the room was gone, replaced by a steady, calm focus, as if something inside him had finally aligned. And then, after reviewing everything, after seeing the pattern clearly, after understanding the mistakes not as proof of weakness but as incomplete progress, Ethan reached a decision, not loud, not dramatic, just clear. He was going to try again, but this time it would not be another attempt like the others. This time it would be built on everything he had learned, and somewhere deep inside a small voice whispered this one might be different. The next morning Ethan woke up earlier than usual, not because he had to but because something inside him felt different. The room was the same, the small desk, the scattered notes, the quiet hum of the city outside. Nothing had changed except the way he saw it. He sat down with a fresh cup of coffee and opened his laptop again, but this time he did not feel the familiar weight in his chest. There was no pressure to prove anything, no urgency to fix his life overnight. Instead, there was a quiet sense of control, like he finally understood the game he had been playing all along. He pulled up his new plan, not a completely new idea, but a refined version built from everything that had come before. Every mistake had been studied, every weak point had been adjusted, every unclear message had been sharpened. It was not perfect, but it was better than anything he had ever created before, and for the first time he trusted the process more than the outcome. He began working slowly, reading each line, carefully questioning every assumption, asking himself one simple question: does this actually solve a problem, or am I just hoping it will? Hours passed as he rewrote sections, adjusted details, and simplified his approach. What once felt complicated now became clear. What once felt overwhelming now felt manageable. He was not trying to impress anyone, he was trying to improve 1% at a time. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked at what he had built. It did not look extraordinary, it did not look like a guaranteed success, but it felt different. It felt solid, grounded, real. He knew exactly why each part was there, and what purpose it served. There was no guessing anymore, no blind hope, just quiet confidence built on experience. He took a deep breath and hovered his hand over the trackpad for a moment. The old feeling tried to return, the fear of another rejection, the memory of all the times it did not work. The voice that once told him to stop whispered again, what if this fails too? But this time Ethan did not fight the thought. He acknowledged it calmly and let it pass, because something inside him had already changed. He was no longer trying to avoid failure, he was trying to finish what he had started. He clicked submit and watched the screen for a second, as if expecting something to happen immediately, but nothing did. The room remained quiet, the world outside kept moving, and life continued exactly as it was before. But inside Ethan, something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. He did not feel relief, he did not feel excitement, he felt steady, like someone who had finally taken control of his direction. Instead of reacting to every setback, he closed his laptop slowly and sat there in silence, not waiting for an answer, not refreshing his inbox, not replaying doubts in his mind, just sitting with a strange sense of calm, because for the first time it was not about whether this attempt would succeed, it was about the fact that he did not stop, and somewhere deep inside he knew this was the difference that mattered. The next few days passed quietly, but not in the way Ethan was used to. There was no constant checking, no restless refreshing of his inbox every few minutes. Instead, his routine felt steady, almost unfamiliar. He woke up at the same time, made his coffee, and sat at his desk, not to escape his thoughts but to continue building something real. He began working on small improvements, new ideas, small adjustments, refining skills that he had once ignored because he was too focused on quick results. Now he paid attention to details, things he used to rush through, things he once thought did not matter, and with every small step forward, he started to notice something subtle but powerful. His confidence was no longer tied to outcomes, it was tied to effort, to consistency, to the fact that he kept going even when nothing was guaranteed. One afternoon, as he was reviewing his notes, his phone buzzed softly on the desk. He glanced at it without urgency, expecting nothing important, just another notification. But when he picked it up and looked at the screen, his eyes paused for a moment. It was an email. The subject line looked familiar, the kind he had seen so many times before. For a brief second the old feeling returned, the tension, the hesitation, the memory of every past disappointment. His thumb hovered over the screen as his mind replayed the past failures like a loop, asking the same question again: what if it is another rejection? But this time something inside him remained calm. He did not rush, he did not avoid it either. He simply opened the message slowly. His eyes moved across the words one line at a time, and at first it felt like nothing had changed. The tone was formal, the structure similar to all the others, but then something shifted. A single sentence stood out differently than before. He read it again to make sure he was not misunderstanding. It was not a rejection, it was not a clear victory either. It was something in between, an invitation to move forward to the next step. For a moment Ethan just stared at the screen, not reacting, not celebrating, just processing what it meant. This was new, this had never happened Before, after 27 attempts, this was the first time he had not been stopped immediately. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a quiet realization settle, and this did not happen because of luck. It did not happen because everything suddenly changed. It happened because he changed the way he approached the process, because he stayed long enough to improve, because he did not stop at the point where he always used to stop. He closed his eyes for a second, taking a slow breath, not to calm down but to fully feel the moment, not as an ending but as proof that something was working. When he opened his eyes again, the fear that once controlled him felt smaller, not gone but weaker, as if it no longer had the same power over his decisions. And as he looked at the screen again, a new thought formed quietly in his mind: this is only the beginning. The following days did not feel like a breakthrough, they felt like work, real steady work, the kind that does not look impressive from the outside. Ethan woke up each morning not with excitement, but with intention. He no longer waited for motivation to appear, he simply sat down and continued where he left off. The invitation he received was only the first step, and he knew this was not success yet. This was a test of whether he would fall back into old patterns or move forward differently. He chose differently. He prepared carefully, reviewing every detail of his work, anticipating questions, strengthening weak points that he once would have ignored. Each task was approached with patience, not pressure. He reminded himself again and again, this is not about proving yourself, this is about improving yourself. When the day of the next step arrived, Ethan felt the familiar tension in his chest, but it was not overwhelming. It was controlled, like a signal rather than a warning. He showed up prepared, not perfect but present and focused. He listened more than he spoke. He thought before he answered, and when he did not know something, he did not panic. He stayed calm and worked through it step by step. The process was not easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where his mind tried to pull him back into fear, but each time he returned to what he had learned. Every attempt before this had prepared him for this moment. Even the failures had given him something valuable. After it was over, he did not rush to judge himself. He did not replay every second looking for mistakes. He simply acknowledged that he showed up better than before, and that was enough. Days passed again, and this time the waiting felt different, not lighter but clearer. He understood that outcomes take time, and that rushing would not change anything, so he kept working, kept refining, kept building, not because he needed to distract himself, but because he had finally accepted that progress does not stop just because you are waiting. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a soft glow through his window, his phone vibrated again on the desk. He looked at it calmly, not expecting anything but open to whatever it might be. When he saw the sender, his breath slowed slightly, not out of fear but out of awareness. This was another moment, another step in the process. He opened the message carefully, reading each word without rushing, and this time there was no confusion, no mixed signals, no uncertainty. It was clear, simple, and direct. He had been selected. Ethan did not react immediately. He did not jump or celebrate. He just sat there, letting the words settle in his mind. This was the moment he had imagined so many times, but it did not feel the way he thought it would. It was quieter, deeper, more real than any excitement he had pictured, because he knew this did not happen because of one perfect attempt. It happened because he did not stop, because he stayed long enough to grow into the person who could succeed. And as he sat there in the quiet room, the same room where he once felt completely lost, he realized something that changed everything. This was not the end of his journey, it was proof that he was finally moving in the right direction. In the days that followed, nothing in Ethan's life looked dramatically different from the outside. He still lived in the same small apartment, still worked at the same desk, still followed the same quiet routine, but inside everything had changed. He no longer saw success as a single moment or a final destination. He saw it as a process, something that was built step by step, through consistency, through awareness, through the willingness to continue even when progress felt invisible. Each morning he showed up not because he felt inspired, but because he understood that showing up was the difference. He began to notice small things that he once ignored: the way he approached problems, the way he responded to setbacks, the way he spoke to himself when things did not go perfectly. These details once felt insignificant, but now they became the foundation of his growth. He realized that the person who failed 27 times was not the same person who succeeded this time, not because the world had changed, but because he had changed the way he thought, the way he acted, and most importantly, the way he continued even after disappointment. One afternoon, as he walked outside for a short break, the air felt different, not because it had changed, but because he was finally present enough to notice it. People passed by in a hurry, cars moved through the streets, life continued as always, but Ethan walked with a steady pace, no longer chasing something far away, no longer comparing himself to everyone around him. He understood now that his journey had never been about being faster or better than others. It had always been about staying in the process long enough to grow into the person he needed to become. Later that evening he returned to his desk and opened his notebook, the same one filled with past ideas, failures, and unfinished plans, but this time he did not see them as reminders of what did not work. He saw them as evidence of progress, as proof that every attempt had added something valuable. He flipped through the pages, slowly noticing how his thinking had evolved, how his clarity had improved, how his approach had matured over time. And then he stopped at a blank page for a moment. He simply looked at it, not with pressure, not with fear, but with quiet curiosity. What would he build next? Not out of desperation, but out of purpose. This question did not feel heavy, it felt open, like an opportunity rather than a test. He picked up his pen and began writing, not rushing, not overthinking, just starting the same way he had done before, but with one critical difference. This time he was not trying to avoid failure, he was ready to learn from it and continue no matter what. And as the words began to fill the page, he realized something even more important: success was never hidden behind the 28th attempt. It was built through every single one before it, and the moment he stopped seeing failure as an ending was the moment everything truly began to change. Weeks passed, and Ethan continued forward, not with urgency but with quiet consistency. Each day looked simple from the outside, but inside each action carried intention. He no longer chased big wins, he focused on small improvements, refining his thinking, strengthening his habits, showing up even on days when nothing felt exciting. And over time something subtle but powerful began to happen. His progress started to compound. What once felt like effort now felt natural. Decisions that once required overthinking now came with clarity. He noticed how quickly his mind identified problems, how calmly he responded to challenges, and how little he was affected by the fear that once controlled him. One afternoon, while working on a new idea, he paused for a moment and looked back, not just at the recent success but at the entire journey, every late night, every rejection, every moment of doubt, and he realized something that surprised him. The failures were no longer painful memories, they had become valuable reference points. Each one had taught him something specific, something he could now use without hesitation. He remembered how he used to see failure as a sign to stop, as proof that he was not capable, but now he saw it differently. Failure was feedback, it was direction. It was part of the process that shaped him into someone who could handle more, who could see further, who could persist longer. Later that day he met an old friend for coffee, someone who had known him during his earlier struggles. As they sat across from each other, the conversation naturally shifted to work and progress. His friend asked him what changed. How did you finally make it? Ethan thought for a moment, not because he did not know the answer but because he wanted to express it clearly. It was not one moment, he said slowly, it was every moment I decided not to quit. His friend nodded but looked slightly confused, as if expecting a more dramatic explanation. Ethan smiled slightly and continued, I used to think success was about doing something different. Something big, something others were not doing, but it is not. It is about continuing when it feels pointless, improving when it feels slow, and staying when everything inside you wants to leave. His friend sat quietly processing the words, and Ethan could see that familiar look, the same look he once had, searching for a shortcut, a faster way, a clearer path. But now he understood there was no shortcut, there was only the path itself, and whether you stayed on it long enough to see where it leads. As the conversation ended and Ethan walked back home, the city felt the same, but his perspective had shifted completely. He no longer measured his progress by outcomes alone, he measured it by consistency, by growth, by the fact that he kept moving forward regardless of the results. And as he reached his apartment and sat back down at his desk, he realized something even deeper. This journey was not about reaching a point where everything becomes easy, it was about becoming the kind of person who does not stop when things are hard, and that realization was more valuable than any single success he had achieved. One evening, as Ethan sat by his desk reviewing his latest work, he noticed something unusual. There was no pressure in his mind, no sense of urgency, no fear of losing progress if something went wrong. Instead, there was a quiet focus that guided every thought, every decision, and every action. He paused for a moment and leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how different this felt compared to the past. There was a time when every attempt carried the weight of expectation, where every result determined how he saw himself, but now the process itself had become the reward. The act of improving, the act of continuing had replaced the need for immediate success, and in that moment Ethan realized something that he had never fully understood before. The reason most people never reach their goal is not because they are not capable, it is because they attach their identity to every outcome they win once and Feel unstoppable, they lose once and feel defeated, but he had lived through something different. He had failed so many times that failure had lost its power over him. It no longer defined him, it no longer stopped him. It simply became information, something to learn from, something to adjust, something to move through, not something to fear. Later that night he opened his old laptop folder again, the one filled with his past attempts, and this time he did not just review them, he compared them side by side, looking at how each version had evolved, how each idea had grown stronger, clearer, more focused. He could now see patterns that were invisible before, small improvements that stacked over time, changes that once felt meaningless but now revealed their true value. And as he continued analyzing, something even deeper became clear. The difference between his earlier attempts and his current work was not just skill, it was perspective. Before he was trying to succeed, now he was trying to understand. Before he rushed to finish, now he took time to refine. Before he feared mistakes, now he used them. And this shift changed everything because it removed the emotional weight that once held him back. He no longer needed every step to be perfect, he only needed it to move him forward. The next day, as he stepped outside again, the world felt familiar, but his awareness was sharper. He noticed how often people around him seemed rushed, distracted, searching for something without fully understanding what they were searching for, and he remembered that feeling clearly, the constant need to get somewhere faster, the pressure to prove something, the frustration of not seeing results quickly enough. But now he saw it differently. He understood that progress is not always visible in the moment. Sometimes it builds quietly beneath the surface, sometimes it takes time for the results to catch up with the effort, and those who stop too early never give themselves the chance to see that connection. As Ethan walked back toward his apartment, a simple thought settled in his mind, one that felt both obvious and profound at the same time. The moment you stop running from failure is the moment you finally start moving forward. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan no longer counted how many attempts he had made. He no longer measured his journey by numbers or milestones, because something far more important had taken their place. He had built a way of thinking that did not depend on quick results or perfect outcomes. Each day he continued to show up, not because he needed to prove anything, but because he understood that growth was now part of who he was, not something he chased, but something he lived. One quiet evening he sat by the window of his apartment, looking out at the city lights stretching across the horizon, the same view he had seen countless times before, but now it carried a different meaning. It reminded him of where he started, of the nights filled with doubt, of the moments when giving up felt easier than trying again, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to revisit that version of who he used to be, not with regret, but with understanding. That version of him had believed that success was something distant, something reserved for others, something that required a perfect moment or a perfect attempt. But now he knew the true success was never a single moment, it was a series of decisions, small quiet choices made over and over again, to continue when stopping felt easier, to learn when failing felt discouraging, and to stay when everything inside you wanted to walk away. He looked down at his notebook resting on the desk, pages filled with ideas, lessons, and reflections from every step of his journey. Each page was a reminder that nothing had been wasted. Every failure, every mistake, every delay had contributed to who he had become, and as he turned to a blank page, he did not feel pressure to create something extraordinary. He simply felt ready to continue, because he understood something that most people never realize: the difference between those who succeed and those who do not is not talent, it is not luck, it is not even opportunity, it is the decision to keep going long enough for growth to take shape, to give effort the time it needs to turn into results, to trust the process even when there is no immediate reward. And as he sat there in the quiet room, with the city moving endlessly outside, he realized that his story was not defined by the moment things finally worked, it was defined by every moment he chose not to stop, and that realization stayed with him, not as a loud victory but as a quiet truth guiding every step forward from that point on.